Hello, Tanse, good afternoon, and welcome to APTN in Focus. I'm Daryl Stranger. Today, we're going to be taking an in-depth look into the wrongful conviction case of Odelia and Nerissa Quewezance and how advocates are getting involved. We'll speak with a criminologist, a senator, and one of our own journalists who has been on the case since the beginning. And as always, we want you to join in on our conversation. You can tweet us at APTN in Focus, or you can email infocus@aptn.ca. Now, before I introduce you to our guests, here's a quick timeline of events of what has happened with the Quewezance sisters. In February of 1993, Odelia, Nerissa, and their cousin Jason Keeseekoose visited Joseph Dolff in his farmhouse near Kamsack, Saskatchewan. He was found dead the next day, beaten and stabbed 17 times. In 1994, the Quewezance sisters were convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. Odelia told APTN and testified at her trial that Dolff had made sexual advances toward her and her sister that night. Both sisters pleaded not guilty to the crime.
I honestly believe that I should never been charged for second degree.
Keeseekoose did plead guilty to killing Dolff and told an APTN Investigates documentary that the sisters were not guilty.
First few times I didn't say it for I lied. I said I wasn't there and stuff like that, you know. Second time I said I was there, but I left before everything happened. And the third time I said I fessed up to what I did. I stabbed him and beat him up.
These 30 years have been tough.
A number of parole violations kept them in prison, but in 2022, Odelia was granted day parole. Shortly afterwards, Minister David Lametti said there may be a reasonable basis to conclude that a miscarriage of justice likely occurred in the case. A bail hearing was scheduled for November 2022. But that bail hearing turned into an argument over a publication ban. The bail hearing got pushed to mid-January of 2023, but a decision has yet to be made. Justice Lay went on annual leave, and now the Quewezance sisters wait for a decision, which may not come for at least a month. Well, our first guest joining us this afternoon is Senator Kim Pate. She has been one of the many voices at the forefront of helping Odelia and Nerissa, and she joins me now. Senator Pate, thank you so much for joining us here on In Focus. I wanted to start simple, and maybe if you could just tell us about how you met the sisters and got involved with the case.
Well, thank you, Daryl. I first met them when they came into the prison system. I was introduced by other women, some of whom I'd known since they were young people themselves in the youth system. And very quickly it became clear that there were a number of issues that didn't fit with what they had been found responsible for. But it took quite some time, almost a decade, for them to fully appreciate the context in which what they interpreted as moral or ethical responsibility, cultural responsibility, did not equal legal responsibility. And so it took some time, and then after that to try and make sure that many people involved understood the context of how they had ended up being in what I would consider wrongful conviction situations.
Well, so with the case, the judge is on vacation currently, so the decision regarding bail has been put on hold. I just wanted to get your thoughts on that as a whole.
Well, I think, one of the challenges was the bail hearing was supposed to happen last year earlier, and for a bunch of reasons it was put off, and then it was put off again in December because the province was trying to get a publication ban. And the judge, I think, was trying to signal that he wanted as much information as possible to try and make a decision. And so, hopefully the plans that have been put in place to provide support to both Odelia and Nerissa will be sufficient from the judge's perspective, and hopefully we'll see a release coming up. Because certainly the test is, is there a likelihood that there will be a review? Well, yes, the minister has already said that he's reviewing the convictions, or that he's ordered a review of the convictions. Would releasing them pose a risk to public safety? I would argue no. One of the arguments being made in opposition to that is what the correctional investigator has also pointed out, is that many Indigenous folks who are released from prison often don't have access to the same level of programs, services, are released near the end of their sentence or after their parole eligibility dates, often with minimal supports in the community, and so often are breached as well because they're trying to negotiate all kinds of issues in the community. Breaches of parole doesn't necessarily mean increase in risk to public safety, but it's certainly part of the issue that the judge is taking into account as well. But if we look at what the sisters have done when they have been in community, for the most part, they have taken care of themselves, other people who they're involved with, working with, or in their families, and contributed to the community. And both want to work, both want to contribute to the community, and both want to finally, after nearly 3 decades, get on with their lives.
Well, Senator Pate, given your experience with the Elizabeth Fry Society, I'm wondering, what do the sisters and other incarcerated Indigenous women need to be successful on bail?
Well, it's not just on bail, but conditional release, and it's what people need to live successfully in community. I mean, part of the reason we did the report, 12 Indigenous Women, about the injustices experienced, not just by Odelia and Nerissa, but by many others, too many others, is that oftentimes people don't start off with the kinds of supports that encourage them to be able to contribute, be part of the community in a way that where most people think everybody has the opportunity. They may not have access to the same housing, education, health supports. Many of them have histories of past trauma. Both Odelia and Nerissa do. Many of them have been in residential schools as well as child welfare involvement. And all of that sets you up. So the things that people need to be thriving in community, all of us need, but in particular when we're talking about people being released from prison or when we talk about alternatives to incarceration for people, is a safe place to live, something meaningful to do with their time, and hopefully something that also provides them with an income, and also a community of support, whether that's family, friends, or a combination. And it sounds almost too basic and too simple, but the reality is there are far too many people who have experienced past trauma, who've experienced abuse, who've been in residential schools, as we know from the incredible reports of the TRC and the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls Inquiry, as well as the Aboriginal Justice Inquiry in Manitoba, too often is missing from their backgrounds, their histories, their past experiences. And so some of that is setting up some of those supports. And there's been incredible support provided by FSIN, by Yorkton Tribal Council, by Saskatoon Tribal Council, by Congress of Aboriginal Peoples. Like, people are coming, and the Métis Council of Saskatchewan as well. So there have been all kinds of folks coming in to provide support. There's no end of support. One of the issues also, though, is the need to provide the resources to those organizations, because there are far too many people looking for support with precious few resources. I mean, we seem to have no qualms about spending endless amounts of money to jail and put people away for longer periods of time. We should be investing instead those resources in the community, as the James Smith Cree Nation and so many others called for after the horrific tragedies there.
Well, Senator Pate, given everything you've said so far, and I'm sure you get this question all the time, but why do you believe the sisters should be granted bail?
Well, I think they have now served more than 23 years beyond the parole eligibility period that was set by the court when they were sentenced in the first place. They have endured horrific experiences of abuse as children, as adults, and they have more than paid their debt to society, even if they were guilty, even if they if they were held responsible for the deaths, as they were initially by the courts, in a context, though, where the racism, the misogyny, the biases of the system weren't, in my humble opinion, fully interrogated. But even more so, the fact that there's someone confessed, their cousin confessed to this, the fact that there were the context in which they talked about feeling guilty and feeling responsible was never fully explored, are all parts of the whole piece. But ultimately, when someone has been convicted, wrongfully convicted, I think we should be working with at warp speed to try and do the best we can to get them out at the earliest possible moment, and to ensure that a more fulsome analysis and understanding of what happened to them is explored, and that we don't continue to have these kinds of wrongful convictions. I could tell you that the 12 women we've identified, but so many more, need to have their cases reviewed. And as Justice Harry Laforme and Justice Juanita Westmoreland-Traore pointed out when they did the review for the Minister of Justice, the fact that the system has been so skewed against women, against Indigenous people, against people who are otherwise racialized is so clear when you look at, of the last 20 cases reviewed, all were men, only one was Indigenous, and only one was Black. I mean, that tells you the story right there, that we have the systemic biases that are right through the system are also part of the conviction review process.
Well, I want to switch gears a little bit to their current situation, and I know Odelia had talked about her current poor living situations at a halfway house. I just wanted to get your thoughts on maybe what should or could be done for their current situation.
Mm-hmm. Well, certainly the situation oftentimes in these small contracts where people are, in this case, the Y, other organizations often are trying to provide services to homeless people, to people struggling with addictions, to people coming out of prison, to people of all ages that could be from very young to, as in Odelia's situation, in her 50s. The reality is it's very difficult to provide a cookie-cutter approach. And the whole system is supposed to be geared towards individualized approaches. That's, in fact, what is supposed to be in place right now, but doesn't exist for far too many. And what she has indicated is until such time as the conviction review process, the bail process is, the next decision is made, she would like to be in a more supportive environment. And I certainly support that. There's no reason that corrections could not be doing that right now. And I've certainly encouraged her to put that request in again. I'm monitoring that and will continue to encourage that she be in a more supportive environment than one that is where people are really struggling. And everybody in that environment deserves to be in a supportive environment.
Right, yeah.
And certainly the staff there no doubt want that as well, but the limitations in terms of the way resources are allocated, again, we seem to have no compunction about putting all kinds of money into the least effective, most expensive part of the system, the jailing part, but then we it's short shrift on the community supports for people when they're coming out, or when they're awaiting trial, or when they're on bail, as we're hoping that they will be soon.
Mm-hmm. Well, one more here for you, Senator Pate, before we let you go. Why is it important that in this case it's made so well known to the public, and there's so much public attention with this case?
Well, I think, there are so many situations where the convictions that have, I use the example often of Jamie Gladou's situation. We talk about Section 718 2E of the Criminal Code as Gladou factors, but never look at the fact that even Jamie Gladou didn't get the benefit of those provisions because she was treated in a way that was racist and sexist, and I would say class biased as well. And so even though she was attempting to negotiate horrific abuse at the hands of the man she stabbed, the context that he had beaten her, he had raped her sister, got characterized as her being a jealous wife, upset because her partner was having an affair. That is such a different perspective than the discriminatory attitudes that, in my humble opinion, really describe how she was treated. And in so many of these situations, particularly for young Indigenous women, for racialized women, for women writ large, most of their violence, when they've been convicted of violent offenses, almost all of them have been responding to violence first perpetrated against them. Some of it defensive, some of it not, but or some of it wouldn't legally be considered self-defense because it would be excessive in the moment, but almost all of it is responding, and often defensively, to violence first perpetrated against them. And in this case, what started out, and why, in my humble opinion, Odelia and Nerissa both felt responsible initially, is when they were being approached for sex and being pressured, they responded with force to resist and repel,
Right.
and so they take responsibility for that. That doesn't mean that they should be held responsible for a death, though.
Well, Senator Pate, we'll have to leave it there, but we certainly appreciate your thoughts on this, and this is something we'll certainly be watching moving forward. So I want to say thank you again for taking some time out of your day and sharing your thoughts on this.
Thank you, Daryl, and thank you to all of you at APTN for the incredible work you did actually exposing what had happened to Odelia and Nerissa.
All right, we have to step aside for a short break, but we will continue this conversation when we come back.
Join our conversation now. Like us on Facebook on our APTN News page, follow or tweet us at APTN InFocus, and send your thoughts to infocus@aptn.ca.
Welcome back to APTN in Focus. We continue our conversation surrounding Odelia and Nerissa Quewezance with Nicole Porter. Nicole is a criminologist and has filed a forensic report for the case, as well as starting an online petition, and she joins us now. Nicole, thanks so much for being with us here today on APTN in Focus. Can you explain for our audience how you are assisting in the case of Odelia and Nerissa?
Sure. I was first brought on by the late David Milgaard. We had worked previously on other cases, and he had approached me and said, I need you to sort of review the case of the Quewezance sisters and help me advocate for them. So I agreed originally to do a pro bono forensic independent analysis, and that's how I originally got involved. I reviewed all of the documents that I could get my hands on in terms of the investigation and the trial transcripts, and it became very clear to me very quickly that these women were innocent and they shouldn't be where they are. I've been advocating alongside David Milgaard and all of the other advocates ever since. It's going on 2 years now.
So given what you just said, you said that, you created the forensic report for the case. So what did you find from a legal standpoint? Is it that they are innocent?
Yes. The first few things that jumped out to me was lack of physical evidence. The other thing that stood out to me was, of course, the confession. We had a confession at the time that this all happened, and also years later on national TV. So the confession was a big part of what stood out. Also, the fact that they were dealing with a jury that had no Indigenous representation whatsoever. It was an all-white jury at the time, and the interrogation itself was really troublesome with regards to the RCMP. They were advised not to speak, but yet they were held there for 4 days, and nothing of which was discussed was videotaped. It was for their cousin who had confessed, but not for these women. And so there was no way to see the state that they were in at the time, and there was really no way to see what exactly they were questioned on.
Well, going back a bit, you had said David Milgaard had reached out to you about this case. So what made you want to help out in this case when you first started?
Well, David was very passionate about the cases that he believed in, and so I knew from working with him previously that if he had reached out to me and specifically asked me to look into the case, I knew that it meant something to him. So in order for me to do that, I had spoken to the girls and I had said, let me try to look at everything and come to an independent conclusion here, as opposed to just what everyone else had been saying before me. And so that's what I did. I jumped in, and it took quite a while to go through all of the documents. The trial transcripts alone were very long. And as I said, it became very apparent to me very quickly that the women were innocent, and it's been 30 long years for them. So I have remained advocating for them on their behalf the entire time, and I started a petition on their behalf to let the country know what happened, to make them aware of this gross miscarriage of justice, as I call it.
Well, you mentioned the petition. That's kind of my next question. That petition's garnered over, I think it's over 60, maybe even 70,000 signatures now. What's the significance of that? That so many people are on board with this.
I mean, it's great. There's tremendous support across the country. The petition has made it into the U.S. and believe it or not, even into Europe. So last I checked, we were between 60 and 70,000, and it shows how many concerned Canadian citizens and citizens abroad that are just absolutely appalled that something like this can happen in our country. It raises awareness to the larger systemic issues that we have here, and Odelia and Nerissa are unfortunately just one of those examples, although on a very serious scale because they have been there for 30 years.
So when you made the petition, did you sort of expect this sort of reaction, or did you have any expectations for when you started the petition?
When I originally started, I wasn't sure what to expect. I thought, what can I do to help these women? And I felt, that as much as I had done this forensic report and I had sent them on the report on to government officials, etc., I felt like I needed to do more. And I wasn't sure that it was going to take off like it did. I'm really glad it did. And I know the women are definitely grateful for the support that it's generated. But we have received a staggering amount of support. People who are reaching out to us all the time asking for updates. So I try to update everyone as much as I possibly can. I was in Yorkton for the hearings, and so I was able to update the petition signatories as things were playing out.
And Nicole, in your previous experience in everything that you've done, have you ever seen a case like this? I mean, I'm sure there's similar cases, but maybe of this magnitude?
No, this, for me, I've worked on other cases before, of course, but this was different. It stood out to me because of the gross miscarriage of justice we're looking at, and because of the amount of time that they've been there. And so this one really stood out. It's a unique case because, as I said, there's a lack of evidence, and we had a confession. And so those two things alone, let alone all of the other flags that I had seen and that people have discussed in detail, this one stood out for me. It's one of many, unfortunately, and I'm really getting to wrap my head around how many other cases there are. But from the standpoint of how long they've been there, this one was very unique.
And Nicole, we had just talked about the petition and how a lot of people are wanting to get on board. Is that the way to support this case and the sisters, is to sign the petition, or how else could people support this case?
Absolutely. I would encourage everyone to sign the petition, change.org/freethesisters. One of the things that we've been pushing is to the Saskatchewan Minister of Justice, and we've been drawing attention to her office in hopes that we can raise awareness to the case, and also some of the things that she can do, although to this point we haven't had too much luck in terms of reaching her and getting a response. But ministers in Canada do have, this is not well known, but they do have the ability to write a written recommendation of clemency to the Governor General. And of course that would be up to the Governor General in terms of invoking the royal prerogative of mercy. It doesn't happen very often, but this is certainly a case that could be considered. And we want to bring that to her attention and to the public's attention, put a little bit of pressure, give her office a call, sign the petition, of course, send her an email. There are things that she can do, even in terms of providing disclosure to the girls' legal team, that hasn't been done. And so we really want to raise awareness, and we want to put the pressure where it matters. So
just to be clear, you haven't had a chance to discuss with her yet? Is that?
I have attempted several times, and I get a very generic response back, unfortunately, and usually one official is passing it on to another official. Now, we did have an Indigenous representative in my place because I was attending the hearings in Yorkton. Dan, had actually stood out in front of the Regina Legislative Building the day that we were in Yorkton on day one. And he attempted to deliver in person. There were over 1,300 pages of signatures, but the office refused to accept them. And so it's unfortunate, but we're not giving up. We're encouraging everyone to sign and become involved. And our hope is that they have no choice but to acknowledge what we're doing.
So just on that note, so your hope is to eventually reach out to them and get a hold of them in this sort of in-between period?
Absolutely. We are still attempting to contact the Saskatchewan Minister of Justice and let them know that there are still things that they can actively do even right now while we're waiting. One of them being that letter to the Governor General, and the other being disclosure, making that disclosure available to Innocence Canada. Of course, when the federal justice minister becomes involved and asks for that, they have to cooperate. But it would be nice to have that forthcoming and to save some time, because 30 years is way too long already.
Yeah, it is. It certainly is. And Nicole, before we let you go, I guess, what's sort of your hope once this does come back to the courts here in a few weeks?
Well, I am really remaining hopeful, as are both of the sisters, that there's a good outcome in this. We were all a little disappointed that the timing of it, that the judge was not able to release a decision right away. So we are very hopeful that he does issue bail for them, and that they can finally, after all this time, go home, be with their family, and start the healing journey that they so deserve.
And Nicole, just one last one for you here. Why is it important that we raise awareness of this case and maybe other cases like it?
It's really important because I feel like, in my experience, Canadians in general don't realize just how much this happens. Miscarriages of justice, unfortunately, are prevalent in our Canadian justice system. And I think this is just one example that we can raise awareness for. But at the same time, it raises awareness for some of those broader systemic issues that really need changed at the end of the day. And so my hope is that Canadians do become concerned and get on board, and it puts pressure on our justice system to make those much needed changes.
Well, Nicole, we'll have to leave it there. We certainly appreciate you coming on InFocus and sharing some of your thoughts on this case. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Kim Bowden and the Congress of Aboriginal Peoples have also been hard at work trying to help the Quewezance sisters be released. He's here now to talk about that work. Kim, thanks so much for joining us here on InFocus. Now, before I get to the most recent stuff, I was hoping you could take us back to the beginning and how you initially got involved with this case.
Oh, that would have been over 2 years ago. I actually saw the documentary that was on APTN, and I was actually in shock that 2 Indigenous women were still tied up with the justice system, incarcerated, for a crime they really didn't commit. And I was like, wow, I need to find out what happened. So I ended up calling you guys and your office and asking for an update. And I was told that nothing has moved. The judicial system there is just goes at a snail's pace, and that really bothered me. And that's how I got involved. I said, if there's a way I can help as the National Vice Chief of Congress of Aboriginal People, I want to do that, and that's how I got involved.
So then, in turn, why was this something the Congress of Aboriginal Peoples felt they needed to take on?
Well, it's what I noticed is that at the time, there wasn't a lot of Indigenous leaders advocating for the 2 women, and whether it was national or whether it was provincial, I found that just wasn't happening. And I was actually quite surprised, honestly, that there was really nobody going to bat for them. And I thought it was really important that we get involved in that, because I never want to see Indigenous people to be incarcerated in prison for a crime they never committed, whether including our jails and that provincially across Canada. It's just the justice system stacked enough against Indigenous people in this country, and we don't look at the justice system as actually fair or anything like that. So this really stuck out to me, and I thought, I want to be involved.
Well, and getting now to the latest details of the case here, Kim, what was your reaction to the judge saying he was taking 4 weeks off before making a decision?
Well, it was rather unfortunate. I mean, we know that this actually been delayed. That would have been the 3rd time now So I was glad just to get there, and I thought we'd have this issue addressed months and months ago, but there was always something, right, that came up. A lot of times, and the provincial government, Saskatchewan government, was working very hard to oppose everything that we put on the table, and that made it more difficult. And I know that when the Minister of Justice Lametti, when he put that letter together and sent it to us back in June, we knew that Saskatchewan government would, take exception to that, and they did. They were fighting again tooth and nail. They thought that the process that the two sisters had been through, the jury, the Court of Appeal, was good enough, and they put their stamp of approval and stamp of justice on the case, and it shouldn't have gone any further. And that was the position that they were taking, the Saskatchewan government.
Mm-hmm. Well, and Kim, some people might not know this, but you and your wife are actually sureties and have opened your home to Nerissa if she gets bail. Why is that something that you guys want to do, and why did you want to do that?
Well, prior to me being the National Vice Chief, I used to run a mental health approved home. I was licensed to do that. I dealt with a lot of people who had mental health issues, struggling with addictions, all those kind of things. And I also had to I work closely with them as well. We'd be attending courts. We'd be attending. I actually attended meetings, with resources, supports, that kind of thing. So it wasn't new to me. And the biggest reason too is that I did not want the court to use an excuse of her not having, Nerissa, for example, not having any home to go to or any place to go if she was released. And so that's why I initially did that. I thought it was very important. I didn't want any excuse for them to make, because that's how they roll. No offense, but this is what they do. And housing's a big issue. And that's funny too. I just had a call here. We had a conference call about the steps that we're going to take, and how we're going to support both Nerissa and Odelia when they transition back into the community. And so yeah, that was important for me and my wife. Yeah.
Well, just on what you had just touched on there, Kim, what do you think the sisters will need to be successful on bail?
Well, I certainly supports, for sure. Integrating back into the community, getting in touch with their culture, elder support, for example, is another one. And also the interests that they both have. Nerissa, for example, I found out that she likes to do things like square dancing, which I didn't know. Apparently she can even teach it. That was something new to me. I thought, wow, that's really cool. So there's a lot of things I did not know, that the things and skills and that Nerissa has. I thought it was really, really good. And one good thing too, and I've also, we were talking about this in terms of Nerissa, was that I'm going to actually learn a lot from her. Mm-hmm. In terms of the judicial system, Correction Services Canada, how they operate, we'll have some really deep insight that I would never be able to get anywhere else, and she'll certainly have that. And so that'll be really good. It's going to be. I'm looking forward to learning from her as well.
And you touched on the culture aspect. Why is the culture aspect so important in this case and for them?
It's really important. They both attended residential school, which is, their culture and languages, all that was taken away from them. Then you go into institutionalized, again, 30 years, not a whole lot of supports there from that end. And that's why I think it's really important. And it'll really help both of them ground themselves. I really, and today, if you meet them, you get that sense from both of them. I really get that from both, that they're well grounded. They're very, very interested in not necessarily telling her story, but actually using what's happened to them, and from a positive sense as well. Talking with with other people in their communities, and I think they're going to be leaders. I really do, and we can certainly learn a lot from what happened to them in terms of their experiences. So I'm looking forward to that. The culture part is so important. It really, anybody who's tied up in the correction services, corrections, justice system itself, one thing that really, really is important is getting in touch with culture, traditions, elders, all those things that come into play is really, really important for them to be grounded so they don't go back into that facility ever again. I hope when we get them out, they'll never go back there ever again.
Mm-hmm. And Kim, given your knowledge of this case, how many other people are in similar circumstances of being wrongfully convicted?
We understand, this is just based on Indigenous women alone, we understand there's about another 9. Unfortunately, Kim Pate, actually, Senator Kim Pate had come out with a report about a year or so ago. She talked about 12 people, 12 Indigenous women, and out of the 12, 2 of them were Odelia and Nerissa, and then one of the women that were in there had passed away inside the facility. So there's about 9. And what we're hoping too that will happen is that people will actually come forward and talk about and try to advocate for themselves to get out of there. If they're wrongfully convicted, they shouldn't be in there. And we're hoping that this story will help them to gather up the strength to get out of there, because they shouldn't be there. Nobody should be incarcerated for something they never did. Yeah. Doesn't matter what country you're in. So yeah. Anyways, yeah, I thought that would be really important, that message that we get across.
Well, yeah, you had just touched on, again, one of my next questions is how could this case help those that are also wrongfully incarcerated?
Well, 2.5 years ago when I started, when I heard that there were others that were incarcerated, that were wrongfully committed, that they wanted to go forward, but they weren't sure how to do it. And they actually weren't sure they would get the supports necessary, advocacy or advocate organizations to help them. And I really think that now that this has happened, that there is hope. Yeah, it's been a long time, pushing over 2 years. Actually, like I said, I didn't think it would take this long, but at least there's some hope for them. And I'm really hoping that they will come forward.
And Kim, before we let you go here, sort of an overall question, if you will, why is it important to make this case known to the rest of the country about what's happening with the Quewezance sisters?
Well, one of the things that the different critics of the justice system have said, that this is like a free ride for Indigenous people. Like, if you get federally incarcerated in the court system, that you're going to Club Fed or something. And that's not the case. And that's why it's really important that we get this message across. This has nothing to do with having a free ride in any prison. I mean, you don't serve 30 years plus for a crime you didn't commit and then call it a free ride. Because there are critics out there that say that, and there's lots of them. We're up against it all the time, each and every day. And it's really important that we start to educate the public. If the public really understood what's really going on within our facilities, for example, federal facilities, they'd be astounded. But that we got to figure out how we're going to get that message across, how we can inform the public that, well, for example, there's a suicide rate of Indigenous people inside these facilities, and that's not really been talked about. There's people that are being sexually assaulted. They're being assaulted in general, and that shouldn't be happening. You go to prison, like, you're not going there. You're sentenced to go there as punishment, not for punishment. And I remember Dr. Zinger saying exactly that, the ombudsman, and that's not the case. And we need, if we had more Indigenous people involved in the process, in decision making, for example, like Correction Services Canada hasn't even named a commissioner yet. They're supposed to name an Indigenous commissioner. That hasn't happened.
Well, Kim, we'll have to leave it there, but we certainly appreciate you coming on and sharing your insight with us, and we will certainly be watching how this plays out moving forward.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
All right, it's time for one final break, but we'll speak with Kathleen Martins when we come back. Welcome back to APTN in Focus. Our very own Kathleen Martins joins me now in studio. Kathleen, it's such a pleasure to chat with you, and I know you've been following this right from its beginning, right? So first off, we've had 3 advocates and criminologists and a whole whack of people weighing in on this. given what you've heard today, what have you heard from them?
Well, they are advocates, so they do want to see these women freed. They made the point over and over that they need to be freed on bail with support. Yeah. And I think we all know why. We know that if you're free without support, it won't take long and could be in some kind of trouble. Yeah. Either, a relapse with addiction or, or something worse, and you're back inside. Mm-hmm. And everything you've worked towards, is kaput. So they need to be released with support, the advocates say. They also say it's been a long time. They've been 2.5 years, 3 years, and Kim Pate's known them for 3 decades. But what I took from what the 3 advocates had to say is that they still believe that the women are wrongfully convicted.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the reasons as well that their trial has been delayed, it's been delayed a few times, and one of those was actually due to a publication ban that we were fighting. So can you sort of update us on what happened there and then sort of what resulted from that?
Yeah, for sure. So you're referring to the bail hearing.
Yes, sorry.
That's okay. So it's complicated. There's a lot going on. So they applied for bail once Justice Minister David Lametti had someone review the case preliminarily and say, hey, there's a potential for a conflict or potential for a wrongful dismissal here. And so their lawyer, James Lockyer, knows that that can take up to 2 years, the full review. And so why have them wait another 2 years on top of 30 years? So what happened is the Crown put its position on paper, and so did the defense. And that would be argued in front of the judge. And I applied, those are public documents in the court, and I applied for them because I wanted to read them and see who was supporting bail, who was against it, and why. And it turned out that the Crown was opposed to it, and this is why. These are the documents that the Crown...
That's all the documents right there.
That the Crown put in.
Oh, man.
And this is 462 pages.
Wow.
And what it is it's the Quewezance sisters' corrections and bail records. And that's what the Crown put in to oppose them getting bail, feeling that this would speak for itself, their records. And they fought us getting a hold of it before they could argue it in court. And we put up a defense. APTN believes very strongly in protecting and promoting press freedom, and the judge sided with us. So I was able to receive this around Christmas time, and spent some time reading it, and then we put out some stories. But that's what happened, and that delayed their bail hearing by a good couple of months. Yeah. And they understood. The sisters, we explained it to them. We said, we have to do this from a news gathering point of view, but it does affect you. And, they didn't say don't do it. They just said they wanted to be home for Christmas. They were hoping they would be out by Christmas to be with their families, and that didn't happen. Yeah. But now it's back on track. We've got the documents, we wrote the stories, and the women are actually supposed to find out what the judge's decision is on February 23rd, coming up in like 3 or 4 weeks. And we'll certainly have that for our audience as well. And Kathleen, so just given everything that you just mentioned, I mean, why is our coverage of this case so important, and that the public is made aware of what's going on? Yeah, well, that's sort of a two-parter, so I'll answer the last part first. I know anyone I've spoken to. I have family members in England. I have family members in Poland. Like, I've talked to them about stories I'm writing, and this is one of them that's near the top of the stories that I've been writing. And they are shocked that if someone else has confessed, and that is known, why are these women still in prison? Why weren't they freed automatically, even on conditions, and then the rest would be sorted out? But why are they still behind bars? So that's just members of the public from other parts of the world reacting, thinking that's wrong. What is Canada doing? But the other part of your question is, I can answer by saying that we know that Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people whom we cover here at APTN all the time, they fill our jails and our prisons. And women are a huge, fast-growing population, especially in prisons. And so it's very important to our audience, this kind of a case, that maybe how many of those who fill our prisons and jails are in the same boat and are even aware that they could have somebody fight on their behalf to free them. They may not even know that there's an Innocence Canada, like James Lockyer started, and he's the Quewezance sisters' lawyer. Mm-hmm. They may not know they can apply to have someone review their case. So all of those reasons are why it's so important for APTN to be doing this story.
Yeah, and it's really great to see that all the work that you've done and everybody else who's covered this case and just everybody that's put an effort into this. It's so great to see. And Kathleen, given everything in your coverage, I mean, is there anything that stands out to you, either about the case or the sisters themselves? Like, given you've done this for so long, is there anything that stands out to you? For sure. That would be trauma. And it's something that we report about all the time here. Layers and layers and layers of trauma that affect Indigenous peoples, from residential school to colonialism to racism. And these women, in these documents, it's very clear that the trauma they suffered as children at home, and then they themselves experienced when they went to residential school, because for those who don't know, they're both residential school survivors. Right. And then other family members who hadn't healed from their own trauma then sexually exploited the sisters. And that trauma and that behavior around the trauma lasted until their late teens, and they were just new adults when this offense occurred. And so in all of these documents, you see that they act out in ways in prison that anybody would do on the outside, but they're doing it under the eyes of parole officers and guards, and so they're punished for it. But in reading these documents, I saw two women, unaware of the impact of the trauma on their lives, how it led to them being in prison, and how were they going to recognize it? How long would it take? How long till they could figure out how to deal with it and heal from it? And that's when you meet them, when you meet Odelia, for example, because she's on bail, and so I've had an opportunity to have conversations with her. She has clearly healed. You can tell the way she speaks, the way it doesn't even talk about herself anymore. She wants to help others, other women, other prisoners in this situation. She wants to be an advocate. You feel that so powerfully, her energy. And Nerissa as well is now making really good strides and knowing what makes her tick, what some of her triggers are. It's all in these documents. She wants, if she is released, she wants to work with animals. She knows what's a good influence for her and what's a bad influence for her. You see the last 30 years of them growing up, understanding that trauma led to addiction, that addiction led to being in a situation where a crime occurred, a very serious murder occurred, and being swept up in that, being convicted as part of it, and then spending that time in prison looking at how they were going to make sure that they didn't spend the next 3 decades behind bars. Right. And it's a fascinating read. And it's very, very telling. Like, so many of them that fill jails and prisons are likely in the same boat. And just to clarify, Odelia's on parole right now. Oh, I'm sorry, parole. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that we got that. Yeah, you and I are saying parole, bail, trial. Yeah, there's a lot going on here. She's on day parole. Right, and so we're running a little short on time. We're almost out of time, but what happens next year? Where do we go from here? Yeah, well, the judge is going to make his decision on February 23rd, and that will be key. And I'm not a gambling woman, but I think it looks pretty good. He was leaning towards getting the right support set up for them, Indigenous supports for them to be on bail. And if that can be put together, I think they have a good shot at it. And we also have a dedicated spot on our website, right? That's right. For the sisters? Yes. The first documentary, APTN Investigates, kicked this all off, broke the story,
And then we in News did a bunch of follow-up web stories, and there's, please, if people have time, go have a look. And we have links to all the stories, so you can spend a good day looking at that stuff and learning about the case.
Mm-hmm. Well, Kathleen, I certainly appreciate you coming on here, and I mean, the work you do is incredible. I'm sure it's a lot, obviously, given your stack of papers there, but thank you so much for coming on and sharing a bit of what we're doing and what you're doing and about the case. It's we really appreciate it.
Yeah,
so
it's my pleasure. Thank you.
Well, that is all we have for you this afternoon on InFocus for the first InFocus of February. Today's episode will be available as a podcast. You can listen to that and subscribe at aptnnews.ca/podcasts or wherever you find your favorite player. And if you missed any of our past episodes or you want to catch up, you can also do that at aptnnews.ca/infocus. Again, thank you to all of our guests and for you for tuning in. I'm Daryl Stranger, and we really appreciate it, and have a great rest of your day.